Okay, so in this video we're going to talk about Drypoint. Drypoint is a sort of subset of what we call Intaglio, and it can be done on a variety of matrix substrates, but it's usually done on copper. This example right here by Texas State's own Max Bridges, who is holding the camera. This is a dry point that's been done on plexiglass. So here you see the plate. There's a piece of newsprint taped to it beneath. It's a very thick piece of plexi. Your plexi does not have to be this thick. It's just ordinary cheap plexi is fine. And to make the image, he's using a steel needle tool, an etching needle, and he's just literally scratching into the surface of the matrix, in this case plexiglass. That incises a line into the surface. When the image is done, ink is put over the entire plate, and then it is carefully wiped away. So only where there are incised lines will the ink remain. So the wiping of the plate will clean off any ink that is in the smooth and unincised areas. So it'll wipe away here, but the ink will hold in these lines. So we had a video a moment ago we were doing on relief printing. This, in a sense, is the opposite of relief. So in relief, where you carve, it won't print. But here, where you incise, is where it will print. Now, he's wiping this plate loosely in a kind of monoprint fashion, and he actually used two different inks in this one. Did you, Max?
Yes.
Yeah, so two different inks. He did the lighter color first, and then he added some more ink and then continued to wipe it. And that's how he gets these two different tones, besides the fact that this is incised and this is just, this tone right here is achieved just by kind of loose wiping of the plate before printing. You see in Drypoint the embossment, and this is distinctive of almost all Intaglio prints, to have that embossment. And in this case, you must have a press to print. And you can see, if you look carefully, the texture of the paper here is extremely smooth. This is the texture of the paper over here before it was printed. So this is the natural texture of the paper, and then this is the texture after it's been printed. That gives you another indication, the intense pressure that the paper goes through with the plate as it's going through the press. And you need that intense pressure to get all the ink from the plate to transfer to the print. So Drypoint is fairly straightforward. You need no acid to etch the plate. You're not drawing through a ground that has been applied to the plate or anything. You are using tools to directly, physically change the plate, and then at a certain point you are inking it up and printing it. Drypoint is not a great way if you need a large edition, because when you scratch into the matrix, you are not only incising a line, but you are raising burrs of material on either side of that line. And that results in a very distinctive line in the print. You'll see a better example of that in a minute. But those burrs break down fairly quickly. So they're not great examples, or it's not a great way to make a large edition, because the plate wears out from the printing. But it is a way to make fantastic imagery. So that's a good example there. I don't have the print from this, but here's two copper plates that go side by side for the final image. You can see a little bit of remnant Sharpie in there, but this image, it's very difficult to read just from looking at the plate, but those lines have been just scratched into the surface with an etching needle. And so this is entirely Drypoint, and here it's on copper. So with the copper, unlike the plexi, you'll get a few more prints. It won't wear out as fast, but it still is not going to print a huge edition. Drypoint like this on straight copper, you might get 10 in the edition before these lines kind of start to wear out. It's not like the lines are going to disappear completely, but the burr of copper will start to wear down and the lines will weaken. So at a certain point, you might be disappointed with how it starts to look, but not at first. Now, a second tool besides the etching needle, so an etching needle is like that. Here are two other etching needles as well. All it is essentially is a sharpened steel point where the tool is rigid enough. So even here, that steel cylinder in there that's held in the wooden handle is rigid enough that when you press, the flex is very minimal. So you wouldn't want to use a really weak needle tool. It needs to be strong enough that you can press into material and really make some scratches, and there's not much flex. And so these are very thick, where it's not even a piece of metal inserted into wood, it's just all steel, or like this, and that's just two different points, one on each end. This is probably the most common way you see it. Another really important tool is the scraper. So here is a three-sided scraper by itself. Here is mine. Because I never use this portion of the tool, I'm only ever using the first 25%, or even less, 20% of the scraper. So I bundle this part with tape so that I can hold it like this. What this is essentially is a three-sided knife. So these sharp edges are sharpened to be as sharp as possible, and then you have the three flat sides. You can hold it like this, and I don't know if you can see it, but this part in here that is the floor of the room that I described in this image, that surface is done with the scraper. And it results in a little bit of texture that the ink will hold on to. If I flip this over so it's the back side, I can scrape and you see I'm scraping up little shavings of copper. So I can use the scraper in a lot of ways. If I do some lines that I decide I don't like, I can scrape away enough copper that I essentially delete or erase those lines. Or I can use the scraper to create a slight texture in the plate that will print as a light gray. Now if I delete some lines with the scraper, but I really want that area to be flawless bright white, I would then have to subsequently use the third basic tool that you need to know about, and that is a burnisher. Burnisher can come in a lot of different lengths. So here's a really long one that has a nice curve to it that I've also bundled in tape. Here's a short one. Here's a long, straighter one than this one. So mine has a little more of a curve. This is a little more straight with a little bit of curve at the end. But these are both scrapers. I could put a little 3-in-1 oil on there, and I just press down and go back and forth. And that is going to burnish it. So I could remove line work with the scraper, and when the line work is gone, then I use the burnisher to remove the texture of the scraper, kind of in this incremental fashion. So the great thing about Drypoint on copper is that the copper is quite malleable. I can continuously change the image on the copper using these three tools and a few others if I want, and I can really alter the image. Burnishers come in a few different forms as well. I thought I'd show you This is a ball burnisher, so it's basically a little cylinder of smoothed, polished metal steel at the tip. And so that's a burnisher for doing fine detail. This is also a burnisher. You can use either end, and it's like a half roll burnisher that you use this way, like that. So this burnisher I would use like this burnisher like this, but they all are essentially doing the same thing. To show you some other prints, this is a series of mine from many, many years ago. So it started out with this, which was a very poorly wiped self-portrait of Drypoint on copper. And then you see some graphite lines and some Sharpie lines of me subsequently trying to think through what I wanted to add. But it starts out really with this, and it's really badly wiped. So there's a lot of plate tone and there's ink at the edges. But it was just a casual sort of thing at first. So theirs was slightly more detail. But then there is with the hand added. So this is entirely Drypoint. It's just me taking the needle tool, scratching directly in. This part right here is scraper. I think there's some scraper mark in the arm. And you know, I mentioned that when you do a Drypoint line, you're not just incising the line into the matrix, you're also raising two burrs. And the fuzziness of this line is a clear example of what distinguishes Drypoint. So the fact that ink is being held not only in the line but on either side of the burr, that's what gives this line its fuzziness. And that is very distinctive of Drypoint. Here is that same plate, but printed in a monoprint fashion, so clearly I did not remove all of the ink from the plate. You could even see the marks of me holding the tarlatan around a finger and kind of monoprint wiping the plate that way. And you see a little bit of the Drypoint coming through, but most of what you see here is just monoprint in the sense that it's not anything in the matrix or on the plate, it's just me playing with the wiping of the ink. Here is, again, the same plate, but still with some monoprint wiping. So there's an excess of ink left on the plate. Extremely fuzzy lines. And that has to do with the Drypoint, and then it's exaggerated with how it's wiped. But that super soft fuzzy line is very distinctive of Drypoint. Here is a proof that has no monoprint to the wiping. So this is a straight up wipe. So this proof is really just showing you what that plate looked like at the time with no weirdness in the wiping. Now, of course, things change. I mentioned that the copper is very malleable. So the great thing about Drypoint is I can scrape away and delete stuff. I can redraw it. So, you know, early on, the figure is holding a pencil. Well, at some point, the pencil turns into a knife. The arm and hand move positions entirely. His head changes. He has these locks of hair, but then it starts to turn into a sort of Rembrandt-esque hat. And in subsequent forms, it keeps changing. So the hat fills in, the hand changes, it moves up and is redrawn. You see how the hand is, this is all from the same plate. So here the hand is down here, it's redrawn to move up and pick his nose. And the knife is scraped away and removed. This has some monotype wiping here. It's the earlier state. And this was the final state where He's gagging himself. These are scraper marks here, so this kind of gives you an idea of what the scraper itself can be, not just a tool for erasing, but also a tool for drawing. And I'm using the burnisher to go back and really smooth out the portions where I want highlights to be strong. Here's a second one. Also, this is printed from a single plate, but a series of dry points. So it starts off like this. You can see random little scratches around the copper. I leave a lot of plate tone, so as I wipe the plate, I'm leaving a lot of plate tone there. In each proof, the plate is changing. So in this case, I just added this figure, but I also changed the eyes a little bit. Here I toned the ink. I added some burnt umber to the ink. Otherwise, the plate is the same as the previous. I scraped away the 5 mark there. So a little bit of monoprint wiping here, but his eyes start to change. This guy grows wings. The wings change. This figure starts to change. His facial expression is redrawn and changed. He's dropped the Sharpie. His hand gesture is moved. I scraped away entirely this figure and put that poof cloud in there. This guy's hand comes up into that gesture. But I also decided that it was too much plate tone and not enough contrast in this. So then I go back, I burnish more in the highlights to smooth the copper out. And you can see the incredibly deeply scratched lines here are a little too fuzzy and blurry. So I burnished them down a little bit so they can have a little more clarity. I also added these little putti, these headless putti based on a little headless doll that I had at the time. And I still wanted more highlights than that. So then I go in here with the burnisher and I bring in more highlights by smoothing out, so using a burnisher and literally just polishing portions of the copper so they are as smooth as possible. And the smoother the copper is, the more easily the ink will wipe away and be lighter. And he gets this Groucho Marx pair of glasses and nose and mustache at the very end. Yeah, so that's the final one there. So Drypoint can be really fun. You don't have to wait for it to dry or etch or anything. It is any way that you are just directly manipulating the matrix, whether copper or plexiglass. End video.
Cut.